Summer is here. Time to wind down from school, relax, and then ramp back up for school or the start of your gap year. This summer, we're working smarter, not harder, and resharing some of our most hard-hitting episodes that you might have missed. We have picked the juiciest and most timely episodes to keep you company this summer. We'll be back with fresh content on August 30th, but for now, enjoy this episode. One of the biggest stresses for a lot of people is getting mom and dad's support for a gap year. So if you need support getting their support, this episode's for you. We'll take you through all the steps, all the things you need to consider to have a really meaningful conversation with mom and dad that's going to lead to the highest likelihood that they are going to be on board with your gap year. Take a listen. Hey there, Michelle Dittmer, host of the Gap Year podcast and your resident gap year expert. Today, we're going to tackle a pretty heavy topic, and it's something that's really important because often this is a huge barrier to young people actually being able to take a gap year. And that is, I don't want to say convincing your parents because it's not about convincing, it's about having that conversation, that dreaded conversation. I don't want to go to school next year. And the tactics that we're going to talk about in this will help you to feel more confident in having that conversation and in help you to have the tools in order to help your parents see your perspective around why you're making that request or that decision for you. Now, if you're a parent, this is also a very helpful piece because maybe you're recognizing that your young person is burnt out, and while they're pushing to go directly to school, maybe you see that maybe they would benefit from pushing pause for a second. So whether you're a parent or a student, these tips are going to be super helpful for you. Now, because it is pretty content heavy, I have created a cheat sheet for you that I highly recommend that you download because it is filled with very specific activities to do, very specific questions that you should reflect on. And what we're covering in this podcast is a little bit more high level. So if you are looking to have this conversation with your parents or with your kids, definitely check out the show notes for that download because it really is so chocked full of things that you can do on your own time, not just in the next couple of minutes that we'll be spending together in your AirPods as you're walking the dog. So let's jump into all of the things that we need to do in order to have a successful conversation with our parents. I know that this can be extremely intimidating and scary, and that is part of growing up. That is part of being a grown-up, being an adult, is having really difficult conversations. So consider this part of your initiation into adulthood and having these conversations because as a young person making that transition into adulthood, these decisions are going to impact your life. And if you are heading in a direction that doesn't feel right for you, you need to step up and you need to learn how to start to advocate for what you need in your life. And this is a great example of how to do that. So step one for having this conversation starts before you even approach your parents, because you need to be crystal clear on why you want to take a gap year. Now, this is not something that you should be thinking of in terms of what you think your parents want to hear or what society is telling you. This needs to come from your heart. This needs to come from the very center of your being and needs to be completely honest. Because if there is even an ounce of BS in there, your parents are going to see through it. They're going to pick holes in it, and it's not going to be authentic. It's not going to be real. So you really need to think about, why do you want to take a gap year? If it's because you are burnt out and you just want to have fun, then make that your answer. That is a reason to have a gap year. If you are confused about what your next steps are and it doesn't make sense to you to jump into a program if you're not 100% sure, write that down as your reason. If you are, if you just don't feel ready, if you don't feel mature enough, if you don't feel that you have the life experience that puts you in that boat of ready to take on post-secondary, then put that down as your answer. So spend some time really getting clear on why do you want to take that gap year. And that is the fundamental, that is the base that you need to do. Now, once you are crystal clear on what that is, now you need to do the good old pro and con list. So get out 2 pieces of paper, put a line right down the middle of each of them, and at the top of it, put university, pros, cons. On the other paper, put gap year, pros, cons. Really important so that you can start to think of what are some of the things in your life from your perspective that you see as the benefits and the risks to each of these pathways. Because we want to make sure that you're going into this conversation still feeling like the gap year is the right decision for you. So put together those pro and con lists. That's the second thing you need to do before having the conversation. The third thing that you should have is a draft list of some of the things that you want to do on your gap year. So what are some of the things that you would like to accomplish? Maybe you want to get your first aid certificate, or maybe you want to test out a different art form, or maybe you want to get an internship at a law office. Whatever those things are that you want to do, make a very draft list, because you want to show to your parents in this conversation that you aren't just looking to freeload for a year. Because sometimes that's their perception. Like, my kid just wants to sit on the couch for a year, and that's not happening. But if you can come to them saying, no, mom and dad, I'm not going to be sitting on the couch. These are some of the things that I'm interested in doing in this year. And this is why I want to do them, because it's going to give me more clarity on my future, or I'm going to develop skills that are going to set me apart from my peers, or they're things I've always been curious about, and I'm scared if I don't do them now, I'll never get the chance to do that. All of these things are very real and great reasons to put them in your list of things to do. So it's not a cop-out. It's not being lazy. Mom and dad, these are the things that I think I want to do. So why are you taking it? Your pro and con list, and a list of things that you want to do on your gap year. With those things, you're pretty prepared to step into the conversation. So the next thing that you have to do is you have to lead them in, warm them up to this conversation. And you'll notice I'm saying that this is a conversation. This isn't an argument. This isn't a dictatorship. It is a conversation. And you need everybody to come to the table in this conversation. So both sides. This isn't a lecture on either part. This is an opportunity for you to come together respectfully and with patience and have a very successful conversation. So here are a couple things that you can do to warm them up to that conversation and to help the process go a lot smoother. So the first one is to not surprise them with this conversation. Make sure you're giving them some time to think about it, get them warmed up a little bit. And so for some people, it's when they're dropping you off at school, just a quick comment. Hey, mom and dad, I'd love to talk about my post-secondary decision this Thursday after dinner. Can we set aside some time? I have some thoughts on what I want to do next year. So very casual, very easy. We're not saying I want to talk to you about a gap year, or I'm thinking of not going to school next year. We're just saying, let's talk about what's happening next year. And I've got some ideas, but I want to sit down together. And with that, you're seeding the conversation. You're planting a seed in their mind. Thursday, we're going to have a conversation about what they want to do, and my kid has some ideas. So they are going to be warmed up to that conversation, which will set the tone really well. The next is to think about where you're going to have that conversation. Is your family like a sit around the dinner table conversation type family? Are you the type of family that might be better if you have it while you are on a hike? Is it a better decision for your family that maybe you want to do it on a long car ride? So you have to think about the location a little bit. That will help you to feel comfortable having this conversation and help your family to feel more comfortable having this conversation. And then the last tip in the preparation side of things is to not overthink it. You don't want to really, really stress yourself out too much and to really, really practice it too many times, rehearse it, and have a script. You do want to prepare, you do want to feel good about what you want to say, but you also want it to be genuine and real, and you need to be a little bit relaxed in that for that to come off as authentic and heartfelt and centered around what you need from your life. So that is something that's really important, is to not overthink about it. Stay optimistic. Your parents might surprise you about how open they are to the idea of taking a gap year. And so just don't go in thinking that this is futile. Just stay optimistic and have a good conversation. Now, in some cases, parents don't like to be surprised by anything, or you're scared you're going to chicken out. And if those types of scenarios are the case, I know of some families where the young person has written everything in an email and sent it to their parents. So if having that conversation is too intimidating and you're scared you're not going to get the right words out, or you're going to be cut off, or it's not going to be received very well, some people have chosen to actually do it all in an email. Now, I don't entirely recommend this because I think that it is a lot more organic to have a conversation, and it allows for both sides of the conversation to come together rather than it be kind of a decision that you've already made and now you're just informing your parents. So if you are going to send it by email, make sure that you're following up with a conversation, and make sure you're very, very careful in the language that you're using so that you are inviting them to a further conversation. You're not just giving the final decision, because we need both sides to be on board for this to go well. Now, in having the conversation, you're going to have to share your ideas. That's where you really have to start. And you want to start letting them know that you've really thought things out. So, Mom and Dad, I'm so glad we're sitting down to have this conversation. And I've been thinking really, really hard about my future and what makes sense for me right now. And although I think university or college is in my future, I don't think it's the right thing for me to do next year. So that's a really great way, a very soft way of saying that I need some time off. I need to take a gap year. So just setting the tone, letting them know up front that this is the way that the conversation is going to go. And then you really want to involve them in the conversation. So you're going to share with them your ideas. You want to take a gap year, and you've looked at the pros and the cons, and these are kind of the things that you would like to do. But I want to hear your side, Mom and Dad. What are your thoughts on this? And give them an opportunity to talk about what their ideas are. And they may be able to do that right on the spot. They may be able to give you some immediate feedback, or they may say, wow, this caught us off guard. I'm not sure how I feel about this. And maybe you want to suggest taking a pause. Say, great, Mom and Dad, no problem. Can we talk about this again tomorrow night or on the weekend, or give them some time when you're going to come back to it. But if they're on board, if they're game to have this conversation and you're ready to continue, ask them what their life goals are for you. So what do they want for you? And in most cases, what it boils down to is parents want you to be happy, healthy, and successful. And with those three things, though all of those three things are not mutually exclusive to taking a gap year. Taking a gap year is not going to make you unhealthy. It's not going to make you unhappy, unhealthy, or unsuccessful. It is merely pushing pause on your formal education in order to gain some perspective. So if you can help them see what their life goals are for you, and that a gap year can fit into that, that is a really powerful tool to use. And invite them to also come up with a pro and con list. So you have your perspective from your lived life, but your parents will also be able to bring a different angle and a different perspective to this conversation, because they have like all of their grown-up life lived experience. They have been in the workplace. They have seen your cousins go off to school. They have seen other things in their life. So their perspective does have value. Now, it doesn't supersede, it doesn't have more power than your thoughts, but you need to bring those things in because they're going to bring up some things that maybe you haven't considered. And it also makes sure that this is a two-way conversation and that both sides of things are being listened to and understood. So ask them to do their own pro and con list and then come back and address any of the things that aren't in alignment anymore. So maybe they have some really good arguments as to why they think you should go directly to school. And talk about those things, talk about them together. And maybe you need some time to think about those things as well. So it's really just a way to come back after hearing their perspective and talk about if you're on the same page or on different pages. Now, if you are at a point where you are still on different pages and you really know a gap year is right for you and you really want your parents to come on board with you, a great question to ask is, what do they need to see in order for them to be comfortable with you taking a gap year? So sometimes if they're getting close to accepting, but they're not quite there, and you want to make sure that they feel that this is a good plan, maybe there's some sort of safety net or some sort of guarantee that they can have that will then get their seal of approval. So some things that I've seen that have been pretty effective is a written contract between parents and student saying that I am returning to school in the fall of 2022. And so you write it out and you are basically guaranteeing your parents that you're not going to become a vagabond for the rest of your life. You're putting it down on paper that this is a commitment that you are making. So maybe that's something that would help them. So some sort of contract. Maybe they need to see a concrete plan or budget for your year because they're still not really sure what this gap year really looks like. So maybe that's something they need to see in order for them to feel comfortable. So you need to do maybe some more research. Now, if this is the case, we've got a great tool to save you time in that planning process, and your parents might actually find it's really helpful in order to really understand what your gap year is going to look like. We have a tool called the Gap Year Planning Toolkit, and we'll link to it in the show notes, but basically it's a step-by-step guide to putting that plan together for your year, and that might be something that will help get them on board with this idea and help them envision what this year might look like, because they may be thinking you're just going to sit on the couch. So if you can put together a really solid plan of all the ways you're going to be moving yourself forward in life, that will really help them. Maybe they need to see that you're going to actually get a formal deferral from your university of choice. So that could be another thing that you could come to agreement on, that you're going to apply in your grade 12 year. And when you get the acceptance, you are going to ask the university to hold your spot for a year. So you're actually going to be applying for a deferral. And maybe that's the insurance your parents need in order to approve the idea of taking a gap year. So now, at some point during this, things might get emotional or heated, especially if you come from a family that's full of passion, or it might get uncomfortable if you're from a family that doesn't usually have conversations like this. And I just want to give you the permission to not be shy, to take a break from the conversation. So this could be a break for 5 minutes, or it could be a break for a day or a week, depending on what the situation is. So you can just step up and say, listen, mom and dad, I'm feeling really overwhelmed right now, or I'm feeling like we're not listening to each other. I feel like this conversation is exhausting me right now, and I'm not really bringing my best to this conversation, or you've given me some really good things to think about, and I think we should just pause this conversation and take it up again tomorrow, next week, whatever that might be. So just acknowledging that maybe we need a little bit of space to continue this conversation in a really positive way. So there you go. You've had your conversation, and it's really important that it doesn't end there. Even if your parents say, yep, great, we're fully supportive, or we have some homework we need to do, or I still don't think it's the right decision for you, that you're going to have to follow up no matter what the outcome of that conversation or conversations was. So you want to show your parents that you are a responsible adult and that you can follow through with any of the things that they're requesting. So if they want that extra plan, do it. If they want an official deferral, research which universities would grant you that deferral. So follow through, because this is a way that you can show them that not only are you going to be able to follow through on the conversation, but you're going to be able to follow through on a really meaningful gap year. So I think if you are still struggling with this conversation, then the Canadian Gap Year Association is really here to help. So we've got this incredible guide for downloads. We run tons of information sessions for parents and for students around what are universities saying about gap years, what should you do on a gap year to make sure it's purposeful, and how do you get recognition for the things that you do on your gap year. These are all things that we do at CanGap. So definitely head to the website and check out the show notes, where we'll link to all of these incredible resources that are here to help you on your journey. So please make sure that you tap into the resources around you and know that there are supports out there for you in this conversation and beyond. So to actually make sure that you're going to have a very purposeful, very meaningful year, the Canadian Gap Year Association has got your back. So again, my top tip is to download that resource. Make sure you have that in your back pocket, and to leverage the Gap Year Planning Toolkit if you are required to put together a little bit more of a concrete plan. So that is where you need to start with this conversation. And just know that this is part of growing up, and this conversation will positively impact the rest of your life. So regardless of the outcome, having the confidence and the skills to have difficult conversations will be setting you up for success in your life. And I am proud of you for putting in the effort into this conversation and for advocating for what feels right to you. So if you do need some additional support, check out the CanGap website, check out our other podcast episodes, and we have got your back. Until next time, keep on adventuring.